Imagine a world where empires dissolve like mist and shadows stretch long across forsaken roads. Tonight, we step into an age where the collapse of Rome unraveled a delicate tapestry, leaving Europe to stumble in a dim twilight of solitude. As cities faded into silence and trade evaporated into memory, new kingdoms were forged in the crucible of chaos, ruled by warriors who inscribed their laws in stone and on flesh. We will wander between stark stone castles and humble peasant villages, listen to the whispers of chivalry that promised honor amidst overwhelming brutality, and feel the icy dread of longships cutting through northern waters. Welcome to the medieval era, where history is a living legend, waiting to be told by the flickering light of the fire. Picture yourself standing amidst the ruins of ancient Rome, where the ghost of a fallen empire murmurs tales of a world poised on the brink of profound change. Once omnipresent and towering, the Roman Empire was a vital lifeline, connecting distant lands with roads like arteries and seas like veins. But by the dawn of the 5th century, it teetered on the edge of ruin. No longer the eternal city, but a fading relic. Political turmoil spread like a slow-acting venom, each ambitious ruler less capable than the last. Barbarians gathered at the gates, Visigoths, Vandals, the fearsome Huns exploiting its disintegrating defenses, while from within, corruption festered and wealth pooled into the hands of a privileged few. The empire, once a titan, faltered under the weight of its own decay, powerless against the external chaos and internal rot. The Roman frontiers, once an imposing barrier against encroaching dangers, grew porous as waves of migratory tribes surged across borders, driven by the harsh necessities of war and survival. Alaric's sack of Rome in 410 was a moment as symbolic as it was devastating, signaling the dimming of Roman power and the ascent of barbarian forces reshaping the known world. Yet within this anarchy, the seeds of a new order took root. Roman towns were transformed under new masters. Petty kingdoms supplanted grand imperial estates. The displaced Romans faced a crossroads, forging alliances with former enemies, adapting to a reality they could scarcely recognize. While the western lands fractured into splintered realms, the eastern territories held firm, evolving into what would be known as the Byzantine Empire. In the west, however, the fusion of Roman legacy and barbarian resolve created a fertile ground for what would later flourish as medieval Europe. It was here, on the turbulent dawn of a new era, that the old echoes of Rome began their metamorphosis into medieval melodies, a tangled tapestry, where the Latin tongue bifurcated into the Romance languages spoken in village inns and royal courts alike as cities declined. Once bustling centers of trade and culture crumbled into mere memories, their grand corridors and spacious forums now choked with neglect. Roads deteriorated into pathways of ruin. Aqueducts fell silent, their life-giving waters no longer rushing into cities grown desolate and ghostly. The mighty urban life that had thrived on the Mediterranean's bounty receded into rural sanctuaries. This shift from the noisy thrum of city life to the quietude of countryside existence reshaped the very heartbeat of medieval being. Local economies, defined by sheer necessity, sprang up around manorial domains and village churches, each a seed of the emerging feudal society. Across these lands, an economic fabric unraveled, Roman trade networks that once spanned continents slowly constricted. The constant threat of invasion and instability stalled traffic until only a whisper of commerce remained. Luxury imports dwindled once common spices and silks all but vanished from everyday life. Coins disappeared from common hands as barter took root, marking a profound economic contraction. Yet merchants adapted, finding their niche in local goods. Culturally, Rome's fall was less an obliteration and more a metamorphosis. The Latin of emperors lived on, gradually, evolving into the languages that would define Europe. Churches rose from the foundations of pagan temples. The church itself stood as an edifice of stability amidst Rome's fallen grandeur. Monks, with devoted intensity, copied texts in cloistered scriptoriums, becoming the accidental guardians of ancient knowledge. Through the barren chaos, they unwittingly nurtured the philosophy and intellect that fueled the flickering lamps of medieval thought. Roman technologies and architectural traditions, though dormant, inspired new creations. The aqueducts and columns, though crumbling, laid the bedrock for future builders. Romanesque architecture emerged, inheriting and transforming the Roman vision, though its goal shifted from grandiosity to stark practicality. From the shells of amphitheaters rose resilient fortifications, signaling humanity's indomitable capacity for reinvention. Amid these seismic shifts, Christianity asserted its power and influence as a guiding beacon through the darkness. As Rome faltered, churches mirrored the resilience of belief over imperial decay, becoming spiritual anchors for a shaken society. Bishops wielded power, rivaling kings, stitching together communities with threads of faith amidst the secular ruin. The church, draped in the robes of old Roman traditions, rose as a unifying force, offering both salvation and structure. From Rome's decline sprang the seeds of new kingdoms as Germanic tribes navigated the imperial collapse, establishing fledgling realms inspired by Roman governance. Charlemagne's rise heralded a nascent centralized force, uniting fragments of Germanic, Roman, and Christian influences. This foundational relationship seeded medieval Europe's feudal networks, an intricate garden of alliances and rivalries over lands threaded with Roman ideals. In the shadow of Rome's fall, Europe began its ascent into the Middle Ages, a world not wholly new. As kings and knights took the stage of history, they played out a narrative intertwined with the echoes of Roman gold, the whisper of Latin scriptures, and the resolute stone of ancient aqueducts' journeys, defined by the very tapestry they inherited from a world that once was. When the Roman Empire finally receded into history, it left behind a tangled web of fragmented infrastructure, a ghostly tapestry of roads, cities, and administrative hubs slowly crumbling into disrepair. Yet, instead of spiraling into pure chaos, this was an age of reinvention. Barbarian tribes, initially seen as uncultured and wild, stepped into the power vacuum. The meticulous Roman roads now bore the feet of barbarian warriors, traders, and settlers, forging connections that were once unimaginable. The skeletal remains of amphitheaters and aqueducts, standing like aloof guardians over the land, served as both symbols of former grandeur and beacons for a transformed world. As these tribes settled, society didn't merely collapse. Christianity, a beacon in this turbulent era, interwove Roman and barbarian cultures, slower than you might think, merging pagan traditions with Christian rites, creating a blended culture of saints and martyrs, celebrated in the native tongues of Goths and Franks. The Visigoths, for example, emerged as pioneers of this transformation, crafting a kingdom on the Iberian Peninsula with a new blend of Roman administrative skill and Germanic customary law. This synthesis was evident in their legal codes, aiming to unify diverse peoples under a singular rule. Yet this path to stability was a rocky one, as religion doubled as a tool of both unity and division. Navigating internal strife, they showed the adaptability needed to forge enduring governance structures. Further north, in the forested realms of what we now call Europe, the Franks were carving out their own legacy. Emerging from the shaded woods, they coalesced into a formidable force under leaders like Clovis I, whose baptism marked both a personal conversion and a strategic alignment with the Catholic Church. This move drew crucial support from the Roman Gauls, tying them to the very faith that had become a cornerstone of the old empire, a deft confluence of martial and spiritual authority. While the Franks maintained control through a potent mix of diplomacy and brute force, their cunning courts and fierce feuds were ground zero for a stable system that would form the backbone of Europe's later political framework. Across the tempestuous waters, the Anglo-Saxons were forging destinies on the British Isles. These seafaring tribes displaced Celtic Britons, setting up a mosaic of kingdoms that laid the groundwork for England. Their richly woven oral traditions laid the seeds for future literature like Beowulf. Their societal structures, sewing the land into divisions of shires, influenced governance for generations. Their shift to Christianity bound the Isles to Europe in faith, reinforcing connections to the legacy of Rome. Rescued and revived by missionaries who brought literacy and Latin, the resilience of their societal fabric would be tested by the Norse storms that were yet to come. In Italy, the Lombards settled and proclaimed their dominion over the remnants of Roman grandeur, while exploiting weakened Byzantine control. Their settlement was not merely conquerable expansion, but a thoughtful reshaping of governance through legal innovations that blended their customs with Roman elegance. Despite friction with entities like the papacy, the Lombards managed to create a feudal Italy ripe for reinvention even after their downfall to the Franks. Among these reshaping spheres, the law held a unique place, reflecting the very soul of these emerging societies. From the Visigothic code to the Anglo-Saxon dooms, law became a familial affair, a complex tapestry of tradition, indicating Roman influence while highlighting vibrant barbarian customs. Notably, the Salic law set blueprints that famously excluded women from royal inheritance, echoing through European monarchy for centuries. Justice was as personal as it was communal, still tethered to tribal roots, but evolving to include the Christian morality sweeping through Europe. During this time, kings rose not from divine right, but from the ranks of warriors, reflecting their battle-hardened societies. Leadership required a delicate balance between ferocity and favor. Kings like Clovis of the Franks or Alaric of the Visigoths had to embody the martial ethos of their people. Through force, diplomacy, and at times betrayal, they unified diverse tribes under a single rule. This evolution of kingship was a dance where might met with newfound divine right. As the church's influence grew, kings wielded not just a sword, but the clergy's words. The intertwined threads of faith and power wove through these new kingdoms, with conversion serving as political strategy as much as spiritual rite. Among Romanesque churches rising on the landscape, theological debates dictated worldly power, dynamics reflecting the struggles and balances within and between kingdoms. Faith was a partner in governance. The Visigothic councils, Anglo-Saxon synods, and other assemblies became battlegrounds of influence, coupling the fate of these kingdoms with the church. Amid transformation, the warrior ethos stood firm as a measure of nobility, blending tradition with emerging chivalric ideals, preparing the path towards medieval knights swayed by valorous tales. In this evolving society, stability came not simply through conflict, but through cohesion, new fabric of governance, law, faith, and warriors, woven from the remnants of Rome, stepping into a future that bore both the shadow and promise of ages past. This was no end, but a profound beginning, paving the tumultuous road into the medieval era's full complexity. Picture Europe after the fall of Rome, a landscape of uncertainty and change. The robust structures of Roman governance had crumbled, leaving a vacuum filled by a world where survival depended on land, loyalty, and the occasional stroke of a sword. Feudalism sprouted from this chaos, more an adaptation to relentless challenges than a grand master plan. Bound by a web of allegiances, this system wove a fragile tapestry of stability across the continent. At the heart of this era were the lords, mighty figures residing in formidable stone castles scattered across the landscape like sentinels. These castles were more than just homes. They were symbols of power and strongholds of security. Lords ruled with an authority that could rival kings, their commands resonating beyond the castle walls to shape the lives of those who toiled under their watchful eyes. Their days were filled with the heavy burden of leadership, which demanded vigilance, justice, and at times swift retribution to protect and maintain their domain. It was a precarious existence, balancing the delicate dance of honor, alliance, and power. Loyalty knit this tapestry together, with the vassals playing a crucial role. A vassal's life was one of delicate allegiance, connecting the grand dominion of the lord and the humble struggles of the serfs. In ceremonies rich with symbolism, vassals pledged service and loyalty, binding them through both fealty and the coveted grant of land fief. This bond was solemn and profound, sealed with oaths that resonated with the deep sense of honor that defined the medieval world. Yet beneath its surface lay a world ripe with ambition and potential betrayal. Amidst this intricate hierarchy toiled the serfs, whose lives turned on the axis of the agricultural calendar, bound not by chains, but by tradition and obligation. Serfs cultivated the land, their existence defined by an unyielding cycle of planting and harvest. Unlike their slave counterparts elsewhere, serfs had ties to the land that granted them certain rights and protections. Though freedom was but a distant dream, their toil kept the manorial engine running, their lives interlaced with the rhythms of the land and seasons, the familiar sounds of rustling wheat, one of diligence mixed with moments of vibrant community, joy during market days and religious festivals. All this interplay happened within the microcosm of the manor, a self-sustaining world where authority and agriculture were intertwined. manors dotted with bustling villages and essential infrastructure like mills and blacksmiths stood as evidence of a society thriving within its boundaries. The lord or his steward managed this ecosystem, enforcing justice and overseeing the smooth operation of daily life. It was a world both contained and bustling, where community interdependence ensured survival despite the broader uncertainties. Justice, therefore, was a localized affair woven into the feudal fabric. In the manor's courts, justice was meted out with ritual and tradition, underlining the lord's power over his domain. The echo of a gavel, the murmur of the gathered crowd, and the scent of freshly turned earth painted a picture of this medieval authority. Decisions were influenced by both personal relationships and customary laws, with consequences ranging from fines for minor offenses to severe punishments for greater transgressions. The justice system, while unorthodox by modern standards, helped maintain a semblance of order amidst the complex feudal hierarchy. The church was an omnipresent force, its influence stretching across all facets of feudal life. With vast tracts of land, the church functioned alongside lords, enriching the feudal tapestry with its dual role as both spiritual guide and economic power. Monasteries preserved knowledge, priests mediated feuds, and the spiritual weight lent by the church's blessings to oaths and marriages revealed its deep-seated involvement in everyday life. Even as it shaped moral codes and laws with religious doctrine, its ceremonies offered solace and structure to a society teetering between survival and devotion. And then there was warfare, a grim specter haunting the medieval consciousness. Lords and their armies, assembled from layers of vassal loyalty, upheld their feudal vows on fields of blood and valor. War was both duty and disturbance. Territorial disputes brought the clash of steel and the chaos of sieges. Knights thundered across fields, armor glinting under the sky, brought alive by the sharp clash of swords and cries of battle or crucible, where feudal bonds were both forged and broken as centuries turned. This steadfast feudal structure began to shift. Trade reawakened, a whispering wind breathing new life into rigid manorial economies. Towns emerged, centers of commerce and craft, drawing serfs and peasants with promises of freedom and fortune. The shuffle of the marketplace, the clink of coin, and the tang of foreign spices marked this emerging world, setting the stage for the decline of traditional feudal power. As change seeped in through trade and the rise of nation-states, the tapestry of feudalism slowly unraveled, giving way to a new age poised on the horizon. Yet the echoes of feudal traditions would linger, a testament to an era that once governed the thrum of medieval life in the shadowy aftermath of Rome's collapse. A void of leadership yawned across the Western world. Amid this chaos, the Catholic Church emerged, not merely as a beacon of spiritual hope, but as a formidable political machine. The popes in Rome, each a craftsman of ambition, maneuvered with precision to transform religious authority into political might. With kingdoms fragmented and warlords vying for control, the Church offered a unifying banner under the cross, providing a roadmap to salvation for those adrift in the turbulent seas of post-Roman Europe. From humble parishes to grand cathedrals, the Church touched every aspect of medieval life. Its reach wasn't just spiritual, it was tangibly earthly, owning vast tracts of land and wielding influence that rivaled kings. Monasteries, scattered like seeds across Europe, were not just sanctuaries for prayer, but the beating heart of knowledge and innovation. Monks, those quiet guardians of wisdom, labored over manuscripts, preserving the intellectual heritage of antiquity by candlelit scriptoria. As tillers and scribes, these devout individuals spun a web of economic and cultural influence that underpinned medieval society's very fabric. A tug-of-war brewed between spiritual leaders and earthly rulers. The investiture controversy spotlighted the Riften epic clash as Pope Gregory VII and Emperor Henry IV wrestled for ultimate supremacy. The Pope, wielding the power to excommunicate, forced even mighty emperors to their knees, redefining the boundaries between celestial intention and regal ambition. This struggle was not just about who appointed bishops, but who ultimately held sway over the fate of souls. The Church also cast its gaze beyond the European borders. Sanctioned crusades were dispatched to distant lands, all in the name of faith. These holy wars not only extended the Church's reach, but reshaped the known world's political contours. Canon law emerged as an empire of its own, crafting a legal blanket that covered both believers and secular affairs. Developed from early church councils and meticulously documented texts, it established a universal doctrine that shaped the moral compass of Christendom. Where secular law faltered in its patchwork variety, canon law provided a steadfast guideline, making the Church a necessary arbiter in conflicts where spiritual and secular blurred. Through penance tariffs, the Church enforced moral conduct, intertwining confession with public atonement and reinforcing its pervasive grip on the populace. Amidst this structured world, a flicker of intellectual vitality glowed. Scholasticism, an effort to marry classical philosophy with Christian theology, was embraced by medieval universities as an avenue for exploration. Thinkers like Thomas Aquinas deftly wove faith with reason, constructing an edifice of theological inquiry that laid the groundwork for modern scientific thought. This vigorous pursuit of knowledge did not stifle debate. Instead, it encouraged dialectics as a form of worship, allowing medieval minds to flourish within the protective cocoon of church oversight. Yet, the Church, ever vigilant in safeguarding its doctrines, didn't shy away from using the Inquisition to quash dissent. Heretical movements like the Cathars and Waldensians, with their radical ideas, were seen as direct threats to religious orthodoxy. Through intense interrogations and the harsh light of canonical courts, the Church pursued heresy with unwavering resolve. Although severe punishments might seem draconian today, they were perceived then as necessary measures to save souls from the fires of hell. Illustrating the era's paradoxical view of mercy, daily life revolved around the Church's rhythms. Village parishes marked time with the tolling of their bells, and clerics presided over life's pivotal moments. Church festivals brightened the calendar with doses of joy and celebration, while saints' relics drew throngs of pilgrims to cathedral doors seeking healing and miracles. These objects, imbued with sacred power, generated not only spiritual devotion but economic gain, making pilgrimage sites hubs of commerce and faith. The Church's artistic patronage shaped Europe's cultural fabric. The towering Gothic cathedrals, with ethereal light streaming through vibrant stained glass, invoked a divine presence on Earth. These visual stories, laden with religious symbolism, spoke to a largely illiterate population, mirroring heaven's glory in stone and glass. Manuscripts, adorned with intricate illustrations, offered another pathway to God's Word, turning reading into an elevated experience. However, even as the Church wielded immense power, it was not immune to criticism. Accusations of simony and greed crept in as the institution's wealth grew from tithes and landholdings. Such corruption seeded discontent and set the stage for future reformations, hinting at a turning tide. While the Church's ambitions were boundless, its temporal entanglement sometimes cast shadows on its spiritual objectives. Yet through the darkness and light of power, the Church's legacy intertwined inextricably with the identity of the medieval world, weaving a tale of faith and fallibility that still resonates in the echoes of history. In the dark shadows of early medieval Europe, sleek, dragon-headed longships cut through the mists of the ocean, bringing with them the echoes of axes and the scent of salt and smoke. The year was 793, and the Norsemen had arrived at the holy island of Lindisfarne, not merely as marauders, but as the harbingers of an age that would reshape Europe. These vessels were more than just boats. They were masterful pieces of engineering, capable of slicing through ocean waves and navigating shallow rivers, alike a feat unmatched in their time. With the suddenness of their arrival came great fear, a primal shiver that rippled through the heart of every coastal and riverine settlement. But beneath the veneer of terror lay curiosity, even awe. The Viking longships, driven by fierce winds and iron oars, told tales of a people deeply connected to the sea, almost as if they were born from its very depths. The Vikings, with an intuitive grasp of both shipbuilding and navigation, became traders and raiders, esteemed and feared in equal measure. Their journeys extended far beyond mere theft. They were sagas with strategic aims, capturing lands and imposing tributes on kingdoms that could not withstand their fury. The swift, agile longships ensured that these Norse warriors could vanish as quickly as they had appeared, a ghostly whisper of capture over time. These raids matured into brilliant campaigns and conquests as Vikings settled far from their Scandinavian fjords, laying the groundwork for new grudges and alliances alike. Despite the terror they inspired, the Norse invaders carried an allure, a fascination that transcended their violence. Monasteries, those sacred havens previously held inviolate by Europe's warriors, fell under their ruthless onslaught, igniting fear, but also a strange admiration. Chroniclers, often monks themselves, wrote of these invaders as if they were supernatural beings rather than mere mortals, lost souls, or monsters rising from the sea. Yet, for all their savagery, the Vikings' seafaring prowess and raw courage demanded respect. Indeed, it wasn't long before fear turned to an unlikely respect, with neighboring cultures adopting elements of Viking warfare and governance. The enduring sagas, with their rich tales of myth and exploration, spoke of a paradoxical people, both feared and romanticized, who orbited the fringes of Europe's consciousness. The Vikings were not mere plunderers. As adept traders and savvy settlers, they established an extensive trading network, stretching from the Byzantine Empire to the far islands of North America. Even as early interactions were colored by raids, icy and red with blood, over time, a subtler relationship emerged. Trading ventures flourished, bringing slaves, furs, and exotic goods into bustling medieval markets. Their waves of destruction gradually transformed into waves of settlement. Colonies sprang up across the British Isles and France, and far shores like Greenland welcomed Nordic settlers. The Duchy of Normandy stands as a testament to these shifting tides and the treaties that tempered violence with politics, fostering a uniquely hybrid society. Through these settlements, the Norse defied the one-dimensional notions of barbarian invaders, instead weaving an intricate tapestry of cultural exchange that forever altered the European landscape. The Viking world was a colorful mosaic of beliefs and social systems where warriors, farmers, artisans, and navigators coexisted within a shared mythological tapestry. Their pantheon of deities, including Odin, Thor, and Freya, infused their existence with purpose, casting legends that resonated deeply within their communities. These stories provided not only spiritual guidance, but acted as vibrant beacons of culture, encouraging acts of bravery and explorations on the stormy seas. Viking communities organized through local assemblies known as things, where free men gathered under the sun to resolve disputes, pass laws, and govern collectively. Beneath the widely held conception of Vikings as hierarchical war chiefs lay an unexpectedly democratic tradition, a participatory governance nestled within the fabric of their society. As time passed, the relationship between Vikings and their former adversaries softened. Rather than invaders, they became neighbors and at times allies. The Norse, oftentimes by means of intermarriage and political alliances, gradually integrated into the societies they once terrorized. Figures like Guthrum and Rollo transitioned from formidable warlords to state leaders, adopting Christianity and forging an unexpected blend of traditions. The passage of time did not erase Viking myths. Instead, these narratives lived on, interwoven into the cultural consciousness of European amalgam of lore, spirituality, and history intertwined, casting long shadows over art and literature well beyond the Viking Age. Norse mythology resonated richly with tales of Odin's wisdom and Thor's strength, shaping values that continue to echo in modern culture. They taught courage and wit, while those same myths helped demystify the uncertainties of life and death. 4 generations of listeners. By the late 11th century, the Viking Age began to wane as fortified towns and developing military responses rendered their raids less successful. Norse lands transformed, integrating with the broader currents of medieval Europe. Through these shifts, their legacy endured, not as the bloodthirsty marauders first imagined, but as masterful navigators and tradesmen who bridged diverse cultures. Their genetic and cultural imprint lingers, a testament to their enduring spirit across the ages. And so, the Viking legacy continues to inspire, as their tales have become warmly familiar chapters in the saga of human history. In the medieval tapestry, castles rose like grim giants of stone, reshaping the landscape with their imposing towers and thick walls, symbols of power against ever-present threats. Vikings, rival nobles, and foreign armies lurked at the edges of the known world, pushing lords to transform wooden fortifications into mighty stone strongholds. These castles were not just military fortresses. They were societal hubs where lords controlled vast territories, The air inside was a curious mix of luxury and austerity, as lavish feasts unfolded under banners while draughts whispered through every stone crack. Yet within those cold, uncomfortable walls thrived a microcosm of medieval life, complete with chapels, gardens, and the ever-watchful eyes of peasants seeking refuge. As castles dotted the landscape, the chivalric code shaped the knights who dwelled within. Emerging from a world steeped in chaos, chivalry presented an ideal, a way to temper the sword's brutality with virtues extolled in ballads and tales. Gallantry, honor, and reverence towards women formed a romanticized ideal echoed by troubadours and Arthurian legends. Yet the reality was often a harsher tale. Knights pledged to protect often became agents of the very chaos they swore to defend against. Honor collided with hunger for power in a world where raids and plunder were common, illustrating a stark contrast to the idealized image of noble warriors. Jousting tournaments emerged as arenas for knights to showcase their martial prowess. These events combined sport with social spectacle, where armored figures clashed gloriously amidst cheers. It was an opportunity to parade might and forge alliances, but also dangerous, with splintered lances and the dust of fallen riders. In tournaments, knights honed their skills, preparing for the chaos of real battle, while spectators, including admiring noblewomen, shaped the dynamics of the spectacle. These lavish events, filled with armor clinking and horses' hooves pounding, reflected the dual nature of chivalry, polished elegance interrupted by raw, violent potential in the armory. The evolution of knights' weapons and armor mirrored the relentless push for superiority on battlefields. Chainmail rustled with the gait of warriors, offering necessary flexibility. As battles escalated, full-plate armor emerged, turning knights into nearly invincible icons. The artisans who crafted swords and lances understood the deadly dance of battle, creating weapons refined over centuries. From the slashing longsword to the thundering lance, each tool bore testament to the warrior's determination to prevail. Beyond the clang of blade and hammer, knights depended on skilled craftsmen, reminding us that even in an age of valor, the unsung artisans played a crucial role. Knights were warriors, yes, but their context expanded beyond battle to brotherhoods and religious orders like the Templars and Hospitallers. These orders married discipline with religious zeal, reinforcing faith through military action. In their stone chapels, knights sought penance, reconciling their violent duties with spiritual devotion. In landscapes shadowed by the divine, faith became a guiding compass, legitimizing the clashes of sword against armor as protectors of the righteous, yet blurring lines between sacred duty and political ambition, away from the clangor of swords and shields. Knights managed estates and governed with martial discipline. Their lives were intertwined with their land, overseeing farming and maintaining feudal order. They mediated disputes and held court, infusing chivalric values into governance. These nobility roles highlighted knights' adaptability, balancing martial vigor with shrewd administration. Knights, as diplomats, also brokered peace and represented their lords, reflecting their far-reaching influence and educational pursuits in history, law, and statecraft. Women, too, played vital roles within the chivalric world as wives and managers. Noble women held the reins of estates in their husbands' absences, steering vast enterprises with acumen. Courtly love placed women as muses, while domestic realities confined them within defined roles. Still, noble women exerted influence, subtly shaping the landscape of courts and councils through patronage and political marriages. They were both anchors and architects within a society that respected yet restricted them in the realm of myths and reality. The knight endures as a romantic figure. Though tales of chivalry paint knights as flawless, the truth reveals a more complex image where valor sometimes yielded to darker impulses. These discrepancies underscore the enduring cultural impact of knights, whose stories have mutated through time, serving as timeless symbols of honor, valor, and contradictory human nature. The timeless image of the knight lingers, a silhouette against the setting sun. The legacy of these armored figures continues to influence modern ideals of honor, duty, and service. They live on in military ethos, in cultural legends, retold in literature and films, bridging a distant past with today's quests for noble values. This long shadow, cast by knights, remains embedded in our psyche, ongoing dialogue with history that reverberates in the quest for identity, honor, and purpose. Across the ages, in 1095, the air was thick with anticipation as Pope Urban II took the stage in Clermont, France. His words ignited a spark across Europe. Jerusalem, the heart of Christianity, lay in peril under Muslim dominion. Here, in this intersection of piety and pragmatism, the call to arms resonated beyond spiritual echo. It promised divine pardon and earthly gain. Knights, peasants, and dreamers answered, their hearts set on Jerusalem. Yet, in the tapestry of motivations, besides the allure of spiritual redemption, there lay the promise of adventure, land, and riches, and escape from Europe's unyielding binds of social turmoil and land disputes. The journey east presented a grueling test. Layers of grit from endless walks layered the skin, mingling with the salt of sweat and the earthy grime of unwashed pilgrims. As the Crusaders trudged through the treacherous landscapes of Anatolia to the deserts of the Levant, they confronted the harsh reality of disease and scarcity. The roads they traveled were as perilous as any battlefield, claiming countless lives before the clash of swords could. For those who survived, the very journey painted the eastern lands with a holy aura, further fueling their conviction. But it wasn't just the land itself that made this journey unforgettable. It was the encounters along the way. In crossing these unfamiliar terrains, the Crusaders met Byzantine emperors and Armenian princes, engaging in conversations not always marked by hostility. The East was a mosaic of cultures and power struggles, a web of alliances shifting amidst complex rivalries. Each city held its own tales, its own histories, challenging the Crusaders to see the world as richer and more complex than Europe had taught them to imagine. The climax of this brutal quest came in July of 1099, as Crusaders stormed through the very heart of Jerusalem. The city echoed with war cries and desperate prayers, a cacophony captured by chroniclers like Fulcher of Chartres. What they framed as divine victory was built upon rivers of blood, massacre that spared neither faith nor innocence. In the Crusaders' eyes, the conquest was a divine seal of success, a moment where heaven endorsed their earthly struggles, allowing them to secure not just a city, but a new realm of Christian dominion. Yet establishing dominion brought a torrent of challenges. The Crusader states Jerusalem, Antioch, Edessa, Tripoli were awkward transplantations of Western culture in Eastern soil. Castles and cathedrals rose as symbols of defense and Christian prowess, but the impracticalities of governance soon surfaced. Ruling from afar required delicate maneuvering, as these lords were both defenders and diplomats, managing diverse populations under the looming threat of Muslim reconquest from leaders. Like the formidable Saladin's emergence marked yet another pivotal chapter in this saga. His strategic brilliance united Muslims across Egypt and Syria, striking a decisive blow at the Battle of Hattin in 1187, claiming the True Cross and capturing Crusader leaders. His victory turned the tide. The subsequent capture of Jerusalem unfolded not in violence, but with an unexpected leniency that immortalized Saladin as more than a conqueror, but as a paragon of piety and statesmanship. Jerusalem remained a symbol of spiritual conflict, spurring the Third Crusade, led by figures like Richard the Lionheart. Innocence, too, had its moment under the blistering sun. The Children's Crusade of 1212 unfolded as a heart-wrenching tale of faith turned folly. Thousands of children, intoxicated with visions of divine purpose under the sway of charismatic leaders, embarked on a tragic journey. They found only sacrifice, starvation, exhaustion, and slavery becoming the cruel reality of their spiritual idealism. This narrative, threaded with the desperation of the times, painted the Crusades as more than mere military endeavors. Lay people, too, were swept into a whirlwind quest for destiny across distant lands. The Fourth Crusade unveiled another dimension, one where greed and power distorted the crusading ethos. Intended to reclaim Jerusalem, it instead culminated in the sack of Constantinople in 1204, a shocking betrayal that resonated within Christendom and weakened the Byzantine Empire irrevocably. Motivated by debts to Venetian merchants, Crusaders plundered treasures and relics, leaving chaos amidst the once gloried empire. Political agendas and avarice skewed the original holy intent, fracturing alliances and deepening schisms within the Christian world. Amidst the chaos, cultural exchanges flourished. The West met the advanced civilizations of the Muslim world, absorbing their innovations in mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and architecture. These seeds of knowledge, carried back by returning crusaders, sparked an intellectual curiosity that culminated in the Renaissance within Europe. Art and technology, infused with Islamic influences, birthed a new era of efflorescence. Interactions across frontiers, though often marked by hostility, forged new understandings, blended traditions, and sometimes unlikely friendships, revealing layers of complexity in this historical chapter. The legacy of the Crusades remains a multifaceted mosaic where faith-driven quests intersect with human ambition, fostering myths and new realities. For Europeans, they are both narratives of chivalrous pursuits and cautionary tales of religious violence. To the Middle East, they represent invasions demanding unified defense. This duality persists as historians peel back layers of legend, aiming to reconcile myth with fact. The Crusades, both echoes of antiquity and resounding memories, spotlight an era where the search for meaning sometimes danced dangerously close to the brink of folly. In the medieval village, life unfolded with a rhythm dictated by the earth and sky. From the moment the rooster's crow broke the pre-dawn hush, villagers engaged in a daily choreography of labor tethered to the land that defined their existence. Under the blush of dawn, they moved tirelessly across fields of wheat, barley, and oats, each season whispering its own distinct challenges and fleeting rewards. This cycle of plowing, sowing, and harvesting was the heartbeat of their lives, underscored by village festivals and holy days that punctuated time not with calendars, but the subtle shift of seasons and the somber toll of the church bell. The village church loomed as a constant sentinel, reminding all of a divine order presiding over mortal toil. As twilight cast long shadows, weary villagers found a moment's respite beside warm hearths, where simple meals of porridge or stew and the comforting aroma of fresh bread offered solace. Joy and hardship intertwined in the fabric of communal life. Vibrant fairs and gatherings saw tales spun and traditions upheld, weaving a collective resilience amidst an often unforgiving world. Sacrifices hinted at survival, while faith painted their modest lives with strokes of hope. Life's moments, from the joy of birth to the solemnity of death, were marked by rituals that braided religious devotion with local customs. The arrival of a newborn brought both prayers of gratitude and anxious blessings, while midwives, keepers of ancient wisdom, played a pivotal role in safely guiding infants into the world. With age, children navigated a life charted by family, duty, and faith, roles shaped by both social standing and gender. Marriage transcended personal affection to forge alliances and secure futures. These unions, founded more on practicality than romance, reverberated through community celebrations as fertility rites mingled with sacred vows. Death, enveloped in communal mourning, offered a rare escape from life's relentless demands. As the village gathered in somber farewell, a final escort into eternity, guided by ecclesiastical promise, provided a stark reminder of life's transient nature. The social hierarchy was cemented by the feudal system, an intricate web of loyalty and obligation binding lords and peasants. Lords, wielding power over sprawling lands, relied on the labor and allegiance of those who toiled beneath them. For peasants bound to this land by necessity rather than choice, loyalty to the Lord promised a modicum of protection in a world rife with instability. Yet this alliance was fragile, a mutual dependency decorated with the occasional veneer of estate festivals where distinctions momentarily blurred. Emerging within this medieval mosaic were the artisans and craftsmen, their skills converging utility and art. Towns and nascent cities bustled with these skilled workers, their crafts forming the bedrock of growing urban economies. Each guild symbolized a community, often as resilient as its members were skilled. Whether at a blacksmith's forge or a weaver's loom, their labor contributed to both the mundane necessities and the grandest expressions of medieval life. Cathedrals adorned with ornate carvings and stained glass bore their indelible mark. Health in this era danced on the edges of mystery, with rudimentary medical practices cloaked in both superstition and fledgling science. Physicians drew upon ancient tomes from Galen and Hippocrates, while embracing local remedies. Barber surgeons offered procedures that skated between the practical and the perilous. Yet women, midwives, and healers often wielded knowledge of herbs and charms, crafting cures steeped in both tradition and intuition. Hospitals, more akin to sanctuaries than clinical centers, served those whose faith in recovery often matched their desperation. In medieval society, faith was an ever-present tapestry interwoven with folklore and superstition. The Church's doctrines loomed large, yet whispers of ancient pagan traditions lingered in rural echoes. Every natural phenomenon, from eclipses to pestilences, was ripe for interpretation as divine judgments, rendering the mystical a daily companion. Pilgrimages to relics sought celestial intervention, and the fear of unseen spirits steered daily choices. Despite the clergy's efforts at orthodoxy, the lines between miracles and superstitions often blurred. The medieval marketplace thrummed with the aroma of spices and the din of trades. From bustling fairs to thriving market towns, these were hubs where rural elbowed urban paths of commerce, weaving distant lands into the fabric of daily life. This rise in trade signaled the birth of a nascent cash economy, merchants becoming storytellers of goods and tales. Yet, amidst bustling exchanges were shadows. Poverty and inequality stood stark against the vibrant backdrop of trade. Medieval diets spoke of a world perched on precarious balance, where feasts for the few contrasted with the scarcity of the many. Noble banquets were grand affairs, adorned with exotic spices and decadent roasts. The chorus of social hierarchy echoing through banqueting halls. For most, sustenance was simpler, meals built on grains, modest vegetables, and dairy, occasional game, a fleeting indulgence. Each meal told tales of seasons and scarcity. Faith further defined dietary discipline. Through fasting and feasting cycles, festivals, and holy days carved lively interruptions into the cadence of everyday existence. Steeped in religiosity, yet echoing with pagan roots, these occasions transformed villages into buzzing hives of celebration. Carnivals and harvest festivals gave rise to communal unity, where life's harshness momentarily gave way to laughter and song. Bonds strengthened in the interplay of sacred and profane. Amidst this tapestry, women wove lives replete with unseen labor. Often relegated behind the scenes of history, they shouldered the relentless cycles of domesticity and survival. Beyond homes, they engaged in crafts, managed market transactions, and navigated the narrow opportunities afforded by monasteries. Within society's restraints, women wielded influence through quiet strength, their endeavors binding families and communities with enduring tenacity. In the echoes of medieval Europe, the Black Death emerged not with the clangor of battle, but with a silent reputation that spread its whispers along the tradesmen's routes from distant lands. In 1347, European shores witnessed the creeping terror, ghastly guest, borne by merchant ships, whose holds were filled not only with Eastern goods, but with a hidden menace embedded in fleas that rode upon the fur of scurrying rats. This unseen adversary wasted no time, laying waste to towns and villages with chilling efficiency, turning whispers of distant curses into the cries of ghostly streets, echoed by the rattling of dead carts. Society found itself on a grim frontier as societal, economic, and spiritual fabrics unraveled under the plague's savage advancements. From southern Italy to the heart of northern Europe, it swept like a storm, indifferent to wealth, status, or piety, bringing grand and humble to the same low ebb to those who felt the plague's embrace. It was a nightmare playing out across their very skin, marked by swellings grotesquely purpling with infection. Delirium's fever drove minds to chaotic wanderings, underscored by the eerie final waltz of convulsions. Beneath candlelit chambers, medieval physicians grappled with shadows, attributing the malady to imbalances in the body's humors or celestial misalignments. Their remedies little more than whispers against a relentless storm. The ignorance rendered their treatments as futile as they were imaginative. Bloodlettings, fragrant concoctions, and prayers fell short of staving off what seemed like divine wrath. At the heart of such dread, the responses of society were as varied as they were desperate. Panic took root, compelling families to flee their homes. Fields lay fallow, while neighbors turned into strangers, each one a potential bearer of death. An atmosphere of divine reckoning took hold. Some clergy abandoned their duty, leaving the dying to fend alone, while others faced the scourge with saintly bravery. In an eerie display of faith, flagellants roamed the land seeking redemption through self-inflicted torment. As the mystery of the plague left them to interpret the disease as collective penance for sins unconnected yet deeply felt, tragically, fear-inspired scapegoating led to brutal pogroms against Jewish communities unjustly blamed for calamities wrought by invisible hands. Even amidst the chaos, economic structures began to shift. The enormous loss of life left fields untended and guilds bereft of skilled hands. Survivors discovered unexpected bargaining power. The rigid lines of feudal obligations began to blur. Giving rise to more fluid social dynamics. In towns, remaining merchants ventured further, their ambitions reshaping trade into fledgling mercantile frameworks planted in the soil of necessity. This desperation bore the seeds of nascent trade and commerce, laying the groundwork for future economic evolution. The unraveling fabric of medieval governance under the plague's shadow pitched monarchs and local rulers into tumult. Faced with reduced resources and populations, traditional power structures faltered. Yet necessity prompted the first genuine inklings of modern statehood as local governments grasped tighter control, innovating taxation and policy to provide stability. Through this adversity, the battered foundation of medieval politics began its slow, uncertain journey towards centralized governance. Cultural and intellectual shifts followed close behind. Artists and writers grappled with a world shrouded in grief. Their works of macabre artisanship mirrored the omnipresence of death, capturing the fragility of life. The danse macabre took hold of imaginations, turning images into stark reminders of life's transient nature. Within literature, figures like Giovanni Boccaccio offered solace through tales spun within the chaos, a narrative refuge amidst despair. The era's artistic expressions balanced horror with humanity, a testament to resilience and a meditation on mortality. Religious life was similarly tested. Catastrophic loss prompted deep introspection. Clerical teachings proposed that the Black Death was divine punishment, while flagellants attempted to earn divine favor through bodily sacrifices. Yet the pestilence sowed seeds of doubt, as priests, unable to stem the tide, revealed the gap between divine assurances and mortal suffering. This period of strain cooled a crucible from which reformist ideas would eventually emerge. The horrific upheaval of the Black Death nudged society unknowingly toward the dawn of the Renaissance. Amongst the grim undertones of loss lay the first flickers of renewed cultural awakening. As trade routes reopened, newly kindled ideas swept across the continent, igniting curiosity and a renaissance of old philosophies adapted for new understandings. The calamity had paradoxically tilled the soil for humanism's flowering, sowing ideas that would burgeon into the rich tapestry of the Renaissance new era, rising like a phoenix from the ashes of medieval despair, entracing the arc of anguish to enlightenment. The Black Death stands as a grim harbinger and catalyst in history's ever-evolving tale. As the medieval era drew its curtain, the rise of towns sparked a transformative shift across Europe. Picture cobbled streets, echoing with the rumble of carts and the animated cries of market vendors. Bustling with energy, these new urban centers lured people away from the isolation of rural life, heralding an age where merchants, artisans, and traders mingled in a vivid tapestry of commerce and community. The promised exchange of goods, think silks from exotic lands or tantalizing spices, fueled a slow but sure rise in living standards. Towns became melting pots of ideas and cultures, setting the stage for the erosion of strictly feudal constraints. Here the seeds of capitalism took root, redefining the social order and shifting loyalties from lordly domains to the dynamic spirit of urban hubs. As bustling markets signaled newfound economic vigor, universities like Bologna and Oxford emerged as crucibles of a different kind of wealth, knowledge. The cloisters that had hoarded learning now stood open, welcoming scholars keen to explore beyond ecclesiastical dogma. Bound vellum manuscripts reintroduced ancient Greek and Roman thought, preserved and carried through the currents of the Islamic world. Universities became grounds for debate, where the vigorous application of logic and reason birthed intellectual renaissance. In their stone halls, individuals like Thomas Aquinas dared to imagine worlds governed by both faith and logic, blending Aristotelian teachings with theological insights in ways that rippled through to the kernel of Western thought. At the same time, the artistic scene began to reflect the dawning light of the Renaissance. Artists turned toward the human form and nature, crafting works that balanced reverence and realism. The smell of fresh paint and the sound of the chisel animating stone-filled workshops across Europe. New techniques like linear perspective transformed flat surfaces into vivid realms, capturing the depth of human experience. Patrons, from wealthy families to the church, fueled this creative renaissance, commissioning art that mirrored a world interested in both divine and earthly beauty. Icons like Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo carved their names into history, their masterpieces standing not just as artwork, but as symbols of a world eager to redefine itself. With these shifts came a new lens on faith itself. The medieval church, once the unyielding monolith of spiritual authority, watched as Renaissance humanism encouraged individual spirituality. An intimate relationship with the divine became more prized than institutional adherence, kindling the initial sparks of reform. While the church maintained power, the quiet urge for personal interpretation and connection with higher powers began to weave through society, foreshadowing the religious upheaval that awaited in the form of the Reformation. In this age of unraveling, the sacred halls of faith and nascent science found themselves in an intricate dance. A probing curiosity arose, challenging the acceptance of long-held truths, where figures like Nicolaus Copernicus began daring to place the sun at the universe's center. This intellectual yeast fostered a burgeoning scientific method based on observation and experimentation. The musty air of ancient laboratories gave way to the fresh dawn of a systematic quest for empirical understanding, marking the onset of a paradigm shift that prioritized evidence over tradition. Religious upheaval came to a head as the Reformation broke like a wave on the shores of Christendom. Martin Luther's 95 Theses, akin to a hammerfall echoing through time, challenged indulgences and triggered a seismic shudder across Europe. A desire for simpler, accessible spiritual practices took root, cleaving Christendom into diverse sects and permanently redrawing the map of spiritual practice. This period of change revealed shifting power dynamics as kings and princes selectively embraced or resisted reform to consolidate authority. Amidst this cerebral and spiritual revolution, Johannes Gutenberg's printing press emerged as one of the era's most transformative innovations. Imagine ink-stained pressman laboring over movable type, catalyzing a cascade of rapid reproduction and dissemination of ideas. Books became available beyond the monastic walls, opening minds and piquing curiosity across Europe. The printed word became the new currency of knowledge, unlocking doors to new realms of insight and dialogue, and laying the groundwork for future intellectual proliferation. The fabric of society itself stretched and reformed as the medieval curtain closed. Towns and commerce enabled a new mercantile class to rise, blurring the once rigid class demarcations. In their market stalls and counting houses, merchants and craftspeople reshaped economic dynamics, challenging the feudal bloodlines that had ruled for ages. With town charters fostering self-governance, power began shifting from hierarchical chains to a nascent sense of individualism and democratic ideals. Finally, as Europe's borders, defined by old allegiances, began to fade, a new kind of journey unfolded. Explorers set sail into the unknown, their voyages heralding the end of one age and the bold beginning of another.